The following program is part of a college course. These telecourses allow you to earn college credits at home. For more information, contact a college or university near you.
Life on our planet is constantly changing, reshaping itself in an eternal quest for balance and harmony. In this sense, life is dynamic and sometimes capricious, its mysteries often hidden behind an elegant simplicity. For millions of years, life evolved in step with a natural cadence in which all organisms were interdependent and competitive. Then gradually, the human species developed a unique ability to understand and control the environment through cultivation and fire. Yet it was not until the Industrial Revolution that mankind tipped the balance of nature on a global scale.
No other species has had or has the impact on the global environment that humans have had and are currently having. We have overcome the natural constraints on population size and on resource use. So this ability to move beyond our instinctual genetic programming has in many ways gotten us in the predicament we're in. It also holds the hope for the future. It also allows us to analyze the problem, predict the problem, and begin to correct it before it becomes a catastrophe.
Of the major resources that sustain life on our planet, none seems more fundamental than the air we breathe. Yet human activities are altering this most basic substance with potentially disastrous consequences. A great potential for harm lies not only in toxic pollutants, but also in the changing concentrations of our atmosphere's natural components that result in global warming.
The chemicals that cause urban air pollution are predominantly hydrocarbons from automobile exhaust, factories, electric generating plants. The pollution that causes greenhouse warming is pretty much a different set of compounds. The main pollutant is a naturally occurring compound, carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is given off as we breathe, as animals breathe, as plants respire. So it's naturally in the atmosphere, but human activity has been increasing the CO2 concentration, so it's now 30% higher than it was just a century ago.
Urban pollution and ozone depletion caused by fluorocarbon emissions are problems that have been dealt with in specific and targeted ways. This is not the case with global warming.
In the case of greenhouse warming and the CO2 effect, activities thousands of miles distant may be causing the problem, and so there's less of a connection of cause and effect, action and consequence. So it's more worrisome in that it may be more difficult to control at the planetary level.
Scientists believe global warming occurs because a combination of gases in the atmosphere act like the glass panels in a greenhouse. The atmospheric gases allow light energy to penetrate down to the surface, which warms the Earth's surface but prevent the heat energy wavelengths from escaping back into space. The trapped energy thus warms the atmosphere.
The fact that CO2 has been increasing doesn't necessarily increase the temperature by itself, but it's the subtle effects that it has to do with increasing the temperature slightly and resulting in increased water vapor in the atmosphere. And that's the thing that actually will give rise to the increase in global warming in a lot of the models.
Atmospheric scientists like Dr. Rhodes use numerical formulas to describe the relationship between variables such as carbon dioxide, water vapor, and temperature.
The models are the basis for a lot of experimental programs. People will make a model simulation of the Earth's climate or a current situation, and then they will go out and try and measure it and show that it's either correct or incorrect.
But the models are only as accurate as the relationships programmed into them. For example, increased photosynthesis by plants removes more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. On the other hand, burning fossil fuels and timber adds carbon dioxide to the air, as does plant and animal respiration. Decomposers respire more when soils are exposed to warmer temperatures, when snow and ice melt or forests are cleared. Scientists use these complex interrelationships to predict carbon dioxide levels for global warming models. Field researchers like Dr. O'Shell set up experiments to determine the relationships upon which the models are based.
You know, turn it on and then turn it off in 10 seconds, even though... The questions that we wanted to answer with the experiment here had to do with the effect of CO2 on the natural ecosystems that occur here. One of them is how much CO2 might the plants remove as the CO2 concentration changes.
CO2 is one of the main ingredients for photosynthesis. And since photosynthesis is the main pathway by which energy enters the cycle of life, any change that affects how plants trap and convert energy eventually affects all other organisms on Earth.
Well, these have pretty much stopped growing now with the with the current drought. We know from laboratory experiments that elevated CO2 tends to decrease the rate at which plants use water. And we had the question how that might affect ecosystem function. We began constructing a series of null balance greenhouses where we can control the CO2 between pre-industrial CO2 levels, current levels up to double current CO2 levels, and at the same time monitor the photosynthetic rates and the carbon uptake and flux rates that occur within the chamber. We use the photosynthesis system to look at the transpiration rate or the water loss rate from the plant, and also the photosynthetic rate, the uptake of CO2, or the respiration rate, the loss of CO2 from the plant.
In addition to the metabolic rates of the plant, O'Shell's team measures plant growth in different CO2 environments. Changes in plants often foretell larger changes in the ecosystem.
And this is individual number 1.
For stem growth, we mark a spot on the branch and then measure with dividers to a node, which is basically a mark that's left by past buds on the stem.
There's a couple, but nothing like on the...
Okay. So we go back to the same spot on the branch each time and compare the change in length from that.
This is number 2.
Some scientists suggest that global warming may not become a serious threat because carbon dioxide levels might reach a new equilibrium, with plants uptaking or sequestering excess CO2 in new growth.
Chamber 11, 650.
What we're finding is that cold, moist, nutrient-limited ecosystems like the Arctic adjust very quickly to the elevated atmospheric CO2. So within weeks to years, the system has adjusted to the high CO2 level. The conclusion from all this is that globally there will probably be some stimulation in production and carbon sequestering, but it'll be a modest amount. It will help slow the rise of atmospheric CO2, but it in no way is going to counter the fossil fuel emissions that are occurring.
This seems to be associated with the increase in population. If you have an increase in population, then people have to burn fuel to keep warm, and they have to have transportation to move from place to place, and they have to have energy to build products. Then there's certainly going to be more trace gases that are released into the atmosphere.
The question now is whether global warming will have a major impact on the planet. Will emissions from our factories and cars alter the balance of life?
There are lots of potential catastrophes, I suppose, that we could expect out of a warming trend. One might think of that you could have an increase in the intensity in summertime storms. One could have melting of the Antarctic ice that would raise sea level. I think probably one of the worst things could happen, though, is for people to bury their heads in the sand and to pretend that it's not going to be a problem. I think it's probably going to be the biggest problem.
Global warming is a much more difficult issue to address than some of the other issues that we've dealt with and the society has dealt with in the past. In greenhouse warming, we really need to reduce fossil fuel emission and reduce deforestation and land clearing. The industrialized countries are very entrenched in a carbon-based economy, a fossil fuel-driven economy, and there are not obvious off-the-shelf substitutions that can be made.
All living things depend on their environment for materials and energy. Materials for structure, and energy from the sun to create combustible carbon molecules to power all of life's intricate processes. In a broader sense, human civilization has similar needs.
The generation of accessible energy sources was pivotal in the development of a civilization on planet Earth. Without an accessible energy source, we wouldn't be able to drive, we wouldn't be able to manufacture, we wouldn't be able to fly. It is the key ingredient that makes our society function.
We depend on carbon molecules in the form of fossil fuels to satisfy our energy needs. This concentration on only one type of energy supply threatens our health and perhaps even our ability to survive.
Fossil fuels have been one of the primary sources of energy for a long time. The primary reason is because of their ease of accessibility. They're easy to get to, they're easy to use, they're easy to transport, and they're fairly cheap.
Most energy consumption can be broadly grouped into two major categories: energy for transportation and energy for electricity. In both cases, we rely heavily on carbon combustion, a process that pollutes the environment and threatens nature's delicate balance. So as our energy appetite continues to grow, we must develop clean, unlimited energy alternatives.
There is no universally acceptable energy source that meets all the criteria. The solution to the future's energy problems is going to involve accessing a myriad of different energy sources and using the right energy source at the right time for the right location.
Finding the right energy source to meet transportation needs is particularly challenging. Today, most cleaner burning fuels like propane or compressed natural gas, or fuels produced from organic materials like ethanol and methanol, are still carbon-based. However, researchers are testing hydrogen, a clean burning fuel for use in combustion engines that may be the energy molecule of the future.
The first vehicle UCR was involved with was the conversion of a Ford Ranger to hydrogen. And it involved taking the stock power plant that the vehicle came with, doing some minor modifications to the engine, but the most significant part was adding a hydrogen fuel injection system.
Hydrogen is very efficient. It produces a lot of energy for the amount of fuel that you have to burn. It's also extremely clean. It burns to just water, and it doesn't cause any pollution.
I believe the hydrogen vehicle will give consumers a choice in the future when they come up with a mandate that so many cars have to be zero emitting.
Hydrogen may also provide more ways for us to generate electricity, whether for vehicles or other energy needs. And that's important because even electricity has a pollution cost, sometimes more than we might think.
It depends on how you produce the electricity as to ultimately how clean a source of energy it is. If you produce it from fossil fuels, then you have the same problem of pollution. There are sources of electricity that are much cleaner, though, like hydroelectric power or geothermal, that produce electricity that is used elsewhere.
One potentially clean source of energy is the sun. While plants create energy through the miracle of photosynthesis, humans have not had as much success generating power directly from this source.
Solar power generation is the ultimate clean fuel because it doesn't pollute to anyone. The problems with solar power is that you produce relatively small amounts of electricity for a large effort of producing it. Producing large areas of solar voltaics is very expensive and time-consuming, and that's the limiting factor for solar power generation.
It's only natural that we are drawn to the sun as a clean, infinite source of energy. For billions of years, its fusion reactions have powered all of life's processes without polluting our environment. Harnessing the sun's power in a fusion reaction seems almost limitless.
In the sense of renewable energy lasting us for a period that's very long compared to our history of using lots of power, like since the Industrial Revolution, then fusion would be something that would last an extremely long time. Millions of years is a very long time.
This seemingly endless source of power is also hydrogen-based, its components derived from seawater. Scientists are learning to produce fusion reactions to create heat that in turn generates electricity.
Fusion is the process of taking light elements and combining or fusing them together. The waste product of fusion is helium and the neutron can be absorbed in surrounding materials of the reactor and make them radioactive. Its lifetime of activation is very short, especially in comparison to the very long lifetimes of radioactivity in a fission plant. So in that sense, fusion is also very attractive. And there are advanced reactions plus advanced materials that will basically almost eliminate that kind of radioactivity of the plant.
The question most often asked about fusion, however, is how long we will have to wait before its use is feasible.
There is currently a design that will create the first fusion plant that will produce more energy than it consumes, where you start the reaction going and then it becomes self-sustaining.
Practical commercial production will probably take 50 years. And so the critical question is not, can we afford to invest in such a long-term process? But can we afford not to?
The increase in population of planet Earth is the primary cause for the search for alternative fuels and for additional fuel sources, and that's not going to go away in the foreseeable future. Fossil fuels are likely to be around for quite some time. Ultimately, of course, they will run out, and we will need to find alternative sources of energy. We really need to invest in imaginative and forward-thinking activities to be responsible for our next generation source of energy.
The vast San Joaquin Valley is one of the most productive agricultural regions in the United States. The valley's farms and ranches provide fuel in the form of fruits, vegetables, and dairy products for millions of people. But this role is dependent upon the abundant addition of irrigation water. Seemingly harmless runoff collects in evaporation ponds that double as wildlife refuge areas. Kesterson is one such reservoir, once an idyllic wildlife refuge, now a virtual wasteland. If Dr. William Frankenberger has his way, it will once again return to its former state.
We started to discover dead birds throughout the refuge and many deformed birds, and this was linked to selenium toxicity or poisoning. There's a very fine threshold in terms of concentration between toxicity and deficiency in selenium. Many of the soils contain trace elements. So when the farmers irrigate their lands, they wash many of these salts and trace elements, or metals and metalloids, out of their soil into the drainage water. And this causes a bioaccumulation of selenium in the food chain. And as a result, we see death and deformities of the wildlife.
In small amounts, the metallic element selenium is sometimes beneficial to living organisms. But at the levels found at Kesterson, selenium is highly toxic to wildlife. Officials recommended a drastic solution.
The Bureau of Reclamation's recommendation was to dig up 1,200 acres of soil, and put it into a toxic landfill. Well, I was devastated when I heard about this, and I immediately contacted the Bureau of Reclamation and mentioned to them that we may have a possible solution which would actually solve the problem rather than burying it, and it would be economically more feasible.
Anticipating the problem, Frankenberger and his colleagues conducted some basic research in order to discover nature's means of cycling selenium in the environment.
The process is carried out by microscopic organisms in the soil, which would include bacteria and fungi primarily. We know that bacteria are more active in the aqueous systems, in evaporation ponds and the drainage water itself. In the soil, dewatered soils, fungi are more prominent.
Frankenberger's research revealed more about how organisms detoxify the soil. In the most desirable conversion, the organisms add a methyl group to the metal, which changes selenium to a relatively harmless gaseous molecule.
What we want to do is we want to optimize the gaseous production because it actually removes selenium out of the area. So to do that, we have specific amendments that we can add to the soil. We've discovered that cattle manure and orange peel stimulate these particular groups of fungi.
For each amendment, Frankenberger measures changes in fungal metabolism of the toxin. In a process called bioremediation, organisms degrade or recycle toxins.
The advantage of bioremediation over other remedial technologies is that it's very simple to maintain. It can be applied to an extremely large area, but probably the most important reason why bioremediation has received so much attention and popularity is because it involves the destruction, total destruction of the contaminant.
Before the human population explosion created the need for modern agriculture, nature could recycle materials without our help.
Look at the selenium pellets here.
But as Kesterson has shown, the time of nature's ability to entirely absorb our toxins has passed, and Kesterson is not an isolated situation.
Although we've concentrated our efforts at the Kesterson Reservoir, there are a number of other sites in which elevated selenium concentrations have been noted. On a worldwide basis, we obviously have contamination occurring throughout the environment with deforestation and many man-made operations in which we're clearing areas for agriculture. With use of pesticides and other modern technologies, this can create problems for mankind. This is why bioremediation is such an important concept. It's not only applicable to the metals such as selenium, but also to organic compounds, including the pesticides.
Frankenberger now wants to apply the concept to many diverse pollution problems, from military bases to commercial sites to toxic landfills. As increased population and new technologies stress our environment, it's imperative that we understand nature's needs and minimize our impact on them as best we can.
Bioremediation is nature's way of cleaning up pollution. We're just now discovering microorganisms that can degrade specific contaminants that we never knew of before. Normally, bioremediation is implemented after the fact that we've discovered a problem. But if we can incorporate a bioremediation plan of action while we're producing or manufacturing a product, then we could prevent the severity of the problem from reaching the magnitude that may have devastation effects on the environment.
As we depend on the plants around us for oxygen to breathe and on the bacteria and fungi to cleanse our soils and streams, it is imperative that we use our knowledge of the world around us to maintain harmony with nature. History might record the 20th century as a time in which we've attempted to control our environment with technology and machines. A time in which we've tried to impose answers on nature. Perhaps the 21st century will be a time in which we use technology to look for answers within nature. To preserve our own species by unraveling the secrets of the unity and diversity of life.